Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see such a powerful turnaround. So, good morning to all. We are going to discuss the Arab Revolution and how they have helped or hurt women. So, we have women on our panel. And we have on my right Mona Eltahawy, and she's an Egyptian writer, and she's very well known, and she has a lot to tell about not only the Egyptian revolution and the aftermath and what is happening now in Egypt, but also across Middle East and North Africa. So she's a very good speaker. Mona has been arrested and beaten in Egypt, so she has paid the price, and a very high price for her courage. So she's a very, very brave woman. On her right, we have Nadia Al-Sakkaf, and she's Yemenite, and she's the editor-in-chief of the Yemen Times, which is good to have a woman editor-in-chief. I've been a journalist for 20 years, and I know it is not that common, so well done. She's also a very important person because she fights for human rights, gender equality, and freedom of speech and expression. So she will have a lot to tell us, even if in Yemen the revolution has not led to a change of regime, but it is changing all the same. And on my left, we have two remarkable Pakistani women. Farahnaz Ispahani was an MP until 2 months ago in Pakistan, in Islamabad, and until the elections. And now she had to leave Pakistan because she is threatened by the Taliban. She was a spokeswoman for the president Zardari, and she's a very strong advocate for women's rights and for minority rights. So she will have a lot to tell us from these very big Muslim countries, which is Pakistan. And last but not least, she has Shahid, is also a Pakistani woman, and she's the founder of the Malala Fund. You have all heard about Malala, that hero who at 15 defied the Taliban to get education. And so she will have a lot to say also about what happens in Pakistan and how the Malala story has been diversely received out of Pakistan and in Pakistan. And myself, so I've been a journalist for 20 years. I run the Thomson Reuters, then I was at the management of Agence France Presse, then managing director of the Reuters news agency when Thomson acquired Reuters 5 years ago, and I was asked to run the Thomson Reuters Foundation and transform the Reuters Foundation into something different, which I did, and it has been a great travel. And one of the focus of the foundation, we have different focuses: training of journalists around the world, of course, as Reuters, but also trust law, which is a huge marketplace where we give lawyers for free to NGOs and social enterprise around the world. It was created 3 years ago, and today we operate in 145 countries, and we have 300 law firms members, so it's a big thing. And we also fight for women's rights, and essentially to put the rule of law behind women's rights. So this is a good panel for all of us. So the Arab Revolution took place 2 years ago, and in Egypt and in Tunisia, the regime changed, and it is still very difficult times in both countries, and it has evolved in a way that is very interesting. Next Sunday, that is to say in 2 days, there is probably the biggest demonstration against President Morsi in Egypt, and nobody knows how it will turn. But Mona is very well placed to tell us what she thinks about that. And it's just 1 year that Morsi is in power and is already under a lot of attacks from many different sides. So the role of the army, the role of the Muslim Brothers, etc., is something of great interest. So this Arab Revolution has evolved in a different way in many different countries. But what we know and what I've seen traveling in all these countries has been that women have found their voice. And I don't think they are going to lose it. So it has been a very important role for women in Libya, in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Syria today, still, and they are martyrized in Syria. And they have found a voice, they will keep it. And so I think that it's very important, although many of these women have paid a very high price for that. And Mona is one of them, as I was telling you. You were beaten, you were in the hands of the army, and you were particularly badly treated. So maybe we can open with that and then move to the demonstration of next Sunday.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's really great to see the room packed for women's issues. And to start what I'm going to say, I'd like to connect it to a revolutionary in the United States today, Wendy Davis. I salute her for starting the revolution in Texas. Thank you, Wendy.
Hello.
Just so that we can remember that the women's revolution is global and not just in particular parts of the world. Our revolution now, whenever I'm asked, has the revolution helped or hurt women? That question makes no sense to me, because women are never helped in countries where we have no freedom. So the revolution it didn't actually begin on January the 25th. You saw many, many years of a build-up that led to a revolution that seemed to start on January the 25th and has not finished. The revolution continues. But the short answer to the question that the panel starts with is absolutely the revolution has helped women, because as Monique said, women had a voice all along that you didn't hear, that was blocked for various reasons. And Egyptians, including women, of course, have changed forever, and we will never be silenced again. Hence these protests that are going to happen on June the 30th against our first so-called democratically elected President Mohamed Morsi. But just to give you some context of how, especially regarding the pushback against women and sexual violence and the pushback against women to get them out of public space. Because if the revolution has been about anything for women, it's about women's presence in public space. Back in 2005, thank you. No, actually, I'll take a sip every now and then. Thank you. I need my caffeine, it's early. Back in 2005, the Mubarak regime began to systematically sexually assault female journalists and activists by sending out police and hired thugs as an attempt to get them out of public space. So this is not something new that began now after the revolution. This had been going on for years. What the revolution, which continues, has changed is women speaking out against sexual violence. Women speaking out and saying, I will not be treated like this anymore. A small example, there's a grassroots group that was formed soon after the revolution began, that made a statement a few days ago that basically advised women who are going to the protests on June the 30th to leave their homes with industrial-sized needles so that if anyone assaulted them, they could defend themselves. That is the revolution. They're not calling for vigilante attacks. They're not calling for violence. They are saying women have a right to defend themselves. That is the revolution. Mohamed Morsi was elected almost exactly a year ago as the president of all Egyptians. I myself would not have voted for him. I could not vote because of technical difficulties while registering to vote. I would not have voted for him, but I would not have voted for the other candidate, Ahmed Shafiq. I'm sorry, I'm getting their names mixed up. Because Ahmed Shafiq was the candidate of the military junta. Now, our biggest problem in Egypt right now is the Muslim Brotherhood and the military, which remains incredibly powerful in Egypt. And for those of us on the side of the revolution, to choose between these two powerful entities is a non-choice. This is a false choice. We want freedom. We don't want military rule, which we've had for 60 years in Egypt. We also don't want fascists who claim to have God on their side, which is the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood have women who support them, but I compare those women to the women who support the Christian coalition in this country, to the women who support the religious right in this country. You are not a feminist if your feminism takes you to the point where you say, the men are one step ahead of me. This is not feminism for me. And this is our fight in Egypt, just as it's the fight here for Wendy Davis and those of us who support her in this country. So what women are doing in Egypt is refusing to leave public space, is saying that the revolution was not about feminism, because January the 25th, quite honestly, was not about women. It was about getting rid of a regime that oppressed all Egyptians.
And it was men and women.
And it was women,
as it should be.
It was men and women together. But in order for that political revolution to succeed, We need a social and a sexual revolution that recognizes the multiple ways that our various societies oppress women, because you cannot be free when half of your society is oppressed. And that's what we're working on, and that's what women in Tunisia are working on, and that's what you will hear from Nadia in Yemen. And each of the countries that have had uprisings or revolutions of various kinds have various challenges. One of the biggest challenges, and this particularly concerns me as a woman, as a feminist, and as a Muslim, is the role of religion in our countries as the revolution continues. And each of the countries is handling it differently. We had a disastrous constitution that was rushed in towards the end of last year after our supposedly democratically elected president assumed tremendous powers for himself. Now this is where you come in, especially when it comes to women's rights, because I'm often asked, what can we do here in the United States? What you can do is alert the US administration that it must not and cannot, as it too shamefully has, remain silent about women's rights violations in our various countries just because they support various allies who guarantee so-called stability for you. Women must not pay the price for the stability that the administration here requires of the administration over there. We're the cheapest bargaining chips that are often just thrown across the table just to appease people. And also, do not be fooled by this idea of cultural relativism. I'm from Egypt. I had no say in what my culture is. Gloria Anzaldúa was a fantastic Chicana feminist who I love to quote in this context, because she beautifully straddled Chicana culture, American culture, and she was a feminist and a lesbian. So she straddled many, what she called borderlands. And she would say, I will not honor a culture that hurts me in the name of protecting me. And that applies globally, not just to my culture. When it comes to the Muslim Brotherhood, this is especially vital, because the Muslim Brotherhood will make the argument, this is our religion, stay out of it. This is our culture, stay out of it. When you see women on the ground fighting, as we are in Egypt, in November of 2011, I had both my arms broken by Egyptian riot police, and I was sexually assaulted and detained for 12 hours. One of the biggest changes of the revolution was our ability to speak out and say honestly and openly what happened to us. I was able to speak out about my sexual assault because I'm a writer who has a media profile, and I consider myself incredibly lucky and privileged. But there are hundreds of young Egyptian women who have none of those privileges, who go on television, who go on the streets, and who openly and very courageously, much more courageously than I, say, I was sexually assaulted, the shame is not mine, the shame is yours, and I will not be terrorized off these streets because this is sexual terrorism. This is why you must not listen to anybody, regardless of who we voted in, who claims to play the cultural or the religious card. Because women in Tunisia are fighting to say no. Women in Morocco are fighting to say no. Women in Saudi Arabia, where you might not see a revolution in the scale that we have it, they're fighting to say no. One of my dearest friends from Saudi Arabia is a woman called Manal al-Sharif, who drove a car in violation of her country's rules 2 years ago and was sent to jail for 9 days. Many other women drive cars that you might not hear of, and many of these women are revolutionaries, and everybody in the region is watching these revolutions, and of course they are affected, of course they are changed. You have been changed. What inspired the Occupy movement? Watching all these incredible people on the street telling their various regimes, you do not represent me. So this question, have the revolutions helped or hurt women, is actually meaningless for me, because non-freedom hurts women. To make the revolution succeed and to continue the revolution is difficult, but we will not give up. And June the 30th, we don't know what's going to happen on June the 30th. We don't know if this is going to be a second revolution or not. But what June the 30th represents for me is the ultimate proof that Egyptians have changed forever. Regardless of who our president is, we have discovered this ability to say no. And I'm going to end by quoting a wonderful young feminist I met just a few weeks ago. Her name is Nirvana Sami, and she belongs to that group that has advised women to go out with those needles and to fight back if anybody tries to violate them. She was speaking on a panel about women now and the revolution. And she made a wonderful point about the Muslim Brotherhood and how the Muslim Brotherhood used women in revolution. Now, the revolution had everybody in the street to fight against Mubarak. Women were on the front lines, throwing stones, fighting back against the security forces. Women were doctors in field hospitals. Women were on all the various lines. But the Muslim Brotherhood is trying to change that narrative. The Muslim Brotherhood is trying to change Egyptian women, revolutionaries, into sandwich makers and Florence Nightingales. They've changed the narrative of the revolution to say women were stitching up the men who were courageously fighting. Well, who broke my arms and who else was violated in Egypt? It wasn't just the men. And they were trying to make it seem like all we did as women for the revolution was to go home, make sandwiches and bring them to the men. And this is utterly false. And as long as women like Navana Sami exist, the revolution is helping women and continues to help women.
Mona, thank you. Thank you.
I need my coffee, I swear.
She is fabulous. But this is very interesting that you finish by this, that is to say the role of the Muslim Brotherhood to change the narrative. Because discussing with Farahnaz in Pakistan, she was analyzing exactly that the Brotherhood, and she goes back to the Iran Revolution, have changed the narrative in order to get the endorsement of the West and to look good. So if you want to speak of that.
Well, if those of you who remember the Iranian Revolution will remember that originally the people who came out in the streets were women, were liberals, were leftists, were Jews, were from Baha'is, were from every religious group, and children, women across the board. What happened? How was that revolution hijacked? And we must understand that to understand, because history is extremely important, because headlines on CNN and talking heads on TV often take you away from the reality. What happened in Iran was, who were the only organized people? Just like in Egypt, it was the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood always had their mosques, their Friday prayers, and their jails. They were organized. What happened to the other groups? They were not organized. They were emotional, they were courageous, they had tremendous abilities and consciences and a desire for a better Egypt. But they were not organized. Now, I may sound like a dampener, but I have had a very different experience in government in the two largest Muslim majority countries in terms of the Arab world, Egypt, and then besides Indonesia, Pakistan. And we have had in Pakistan a much longer experience of democracy, though it's been intermittent. And what have been the two major forces women and religious minorities have faced in Pakistan? The military and the mullah, the clerics, Islamic fundamentalism. Same like in Iran. And you see exactly, Mona just referred exactly to the junta and the Muslim Brotherhood as being the two greatest foes of women. So what I will connect this to is, to me, the Arab Spring was not really a spring, but it was a stirring. It was a stirring and a very important stirring. And in that stirring, what's happened for the first time is, yes, you have a democratic government, but is that going to lead to the liberal democracy that many people envisaged, where women would be equal citizens, where the Copts in Egypt, 10 million Coptic Christians who were treated equally, are having their young girls forcibly converted to Islam, are having their mosques burnt, churches burnt, but there are also mosques coming. They are, so even within the minority communities, it's the girls who are being targeted, it's the women who are being targeted. So the point is, this is a long road, and we have to be aware of who we're dealing with. Now, the irony is, who are the two greatest recipients of aid from the United States in the Muslim world? Anyone? Egypt and Pakistan. Egypt and Pakistan. How were the militaries kept going? how was the funding going to these Islamic groups? Where did that money come from? The United States of America. So I'm not blaming the United States of America. I just feel if there is aid, that aid has to be tied, because this stirring to become a real revolution, to have great impact into the future, has to take all of us along.
Yeah, and women's rights. That's very true. So in Pakistan, you have lived many springs and many dictatorships also.
Many
and you
winters.
you even had a woman prime minister elected, Benazir Bhutto. So what is the situation now in Pakistan?
Well, you know, we had the first woman in the Muslim world elected Prime Minister, Benazir Bhutto, who was the head of my political party. The first woman speaker in the Islamic world was elected in Pakistan. The first woman foreign minister in the Islamic world was elected in Pakistan. And they weren't just figureheads. There weren't men behind them telling them what to do. They were elected and they were represented out there. But what you have at the same time, the Taliban is blowing up girls' schools, right? Women in rural areas still do not have access to clean drinking water. Honor killings are still going on. And you see, I may not be at the periphery, my country, of the Islamic world, but this ideology which has now spread of militant Islamization first came into the laws in Pakistan by a military dictator. So we have seen this. So we've been fighting. When we have moments of spring, we're fighting, but we've also learned to fight in the opposition. And that's why I say, don't let them be the only ones who are together, united, and have ways of communication. We must have those same relationships with civil society, relationships with people like you. We have to be organized. And we have to kill the Salaf. It is a long and painful road. And what happened to my prime minister? She was shot in the head and killed because she wanted a new Pakistan.
Yeah.
So you pay the price, but we have no other choice.
Yeah.
Can I say something really quickly?
Yeah.
Christians in Egypt were never treated as equal, even under the Mubarak regime. Just so that we don't think it's worse now, but they were never treated equally because it matters a lot.
Yeah. But we are not debating that, but it's a good point. Shiza, to remain with Pakistan now, Shiza, so someone who has paid the price also is the young Malala, and you are the co-founder of the fund for Malala. And Malala is this extraordinary 15 years old who was shot at by the Taliban because they didn't want her to go to school and she wanted to have an education. So the story has made headlines everywhere in the world, but it seems a little bit less in Pakistan. And so can you speak of that and the situations of girls in Pakistan and education?
Sure. So the Malala story it's very interesting because it gives immense insight into the mindset that currently prevails in Pakistan in terms of the extent of radicalization, but more so the extent of confusion in the society about the reasons for the violence, about the reasons for the insecurity, and about what the society wants to look like in terms of tolerance, respect for minorities, and respect for women. I had known Malala for about 5 years when she was shot. I reached out when she first started her campaign. She was only 11 years old and was one of the most remarkable, brave, eloquent girls I had ever met. So I spent the next 5 years working very, very closely with her, and she became like little sister to me. When she was shot, it was one of the most shocking moments in my life, but also globally. I think she just touched the world and shook people's souls because people realized for the first time that a young girl could be shot in the head for going to school. And I think she became an icon. She was on world news for 10 days, which generally is a status reserved only for juicy sex scandals. So, and Madonna did her striptease for Malala with Malala tattooed on her back. So really, seriously though, she really touched people's hearts, and the whole world stood up and said, I am Malala, which to me means I am brave and I am a girl and I am empowered and I will not back down. In Pakistan, there was a moment. When you saw people coming out on the streets, and it was the first time that people named the Taliban and said, I am Malala, I am not the Taliban. And you even saw right-wing journalists getting up and saying, this is unacceptable. But it was a very, very fleeting moment, and very soon the narrative started to come in, well, if the West loves her so much, she must be a CIA agent. Well, now that her father is going around speaking about peace in the US, he must have planned this. Or, she was never really shot. This is all a conspiracy. And it became very prevalent, and I don't think it would be far-fetched to say that the majority of Pakistanis now believe that Malala is a conspiracy. And I think the tragedy of the story is that this is a girl who gave her heart, her soul, her life to Pakistan, still continues to do so, and is loved everywhere, and will continue to fight for girls in Pakistan. But Pakistanis are so confused and so fearful.
Malala now lives in the UK, where she's studying, and I think she's writing a book also. And so when will she come back to Pakistan? How can she come back to Pakistan? Do you have any idea?
I know that the family is burning with the desire to go back.
Yeah.
Right now, it would be suicide for them to go back. And they're waiting for the day when they can, and they're doing everything they can from afar. So she's started this fund that I'm leading, and it's had its first grant in Pakistan. She's put girls who are in domestic labor back into school. But we can't tell anyone who those girls are. We can't tell them where they're going to school, because they will be a target simply because they're associated with Malala.
Yeah. This is a terrifying story. Nadia, to turn to Yemen now, you have fought in Yemen a very tough battle. I mean, there was really a revolution in Yemen, and unfortunately it was squashed. But it seems that you have found now a peaceful way to talk with the authorities and to try to move the society and to move change in the society. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. What happened in Yemen was inspired by Egypt and Tunisia, but like Mona was saying, was boiling under the surface for so many years. And so it's not the spur of the moment. And eventually we had riots or demonstrations for around a year, which landed up with a political agreement. So the former regime agreed with the opposition that we'll share the power. So eventually the Muslim Brotherhood of Yemen, which is called the Islah Party, along with other opposition parties, and this is very ironic because in Yemen the socialists have joined hands with the conservatives. So it's about politics, I suppose, eventually. And they were the opposition, and now they are sharing 50-50 the power with the former regime. It saved us from Syria's fate. So a lot of bloodshed, which could have happened had our former president persisted and wanted to die on the throne. But at the same time, that means that it was an aborted revolution, or like you said, Monique, squashed. I like the term, like squashed. But in all cases, what is happening now is that we have a 2-year transition. Within those 2 years, we are planning our new Yemen. And it's an amazing opportunity. How many times in history can a nation come together and say, this is what we want our future to look like? It's like in America you say the four founders, the founding fathers. So I am a member of the founding fathers and mothers. You're a founding mother. I'm a founding mother of Yemen.
You're the only woman at the presidium of it.
And yes, and we have 565 founding mothers and fathers and children, because we have young also, in what we call the National Dialogue Conference, where we are working on the future of the country. This conference, which is 6 months long, will end in September, and we will have a new constitution. And this constitution will talk about how we dream of the new Yemen and building in the aspirations of everybody who was contributing to the revolution. Now, concerning women, I'll give you a metaphor. I don't know if you like cooking here, but imagine that you've been cooking all your life without salt. And it's not because you don't like salt or you have a problem, a health problem. It's because you never know what it's like to taste something that has salt in it. And it's because the salt is always in the cupboard and it's locked. And then an earthquake happens and it shakes everything around. And then suddenly the salt comes and it's on the table.
And it's very good.
And so it's an opportunity. So this is where we are at. Now we're trying to cook the new Yemen. And the salt is women, or should I have said sugar?
No, I think it's good to have salt too.
But now we're going to make our new Yemen. And it's important that we remember that there is salt, and it has to be included in the new ingredients. And we're actually here at the recipe writing stage. We haven't made what is the famous food of Aspen? I don't know. What do you guys eat here? No? Okay, we haven't made the meal. And so wait one more year. And by the end of mid-2014, we will know if we have a good meal or we'll end up with food poisoning or something like that.
But it's very important to put women's rights into constitution. So as long as you have that, you have already a good start.
Well, we have.
This is what was.
It's already on the table.
Completely passed in Egypt.
So it's on the table.
Yeah.
And I cannot guarantee. This is why it's so important to be reminded that maybe we can experiment. We don't know how much salt we should put because some of the people who are the conservatives are worried that too much salt can ruin it. I mean, if we have too many women or too much women power or things like that, and we have to get the exact balance for this recipe.
Yeah,
and
but the balance is equality.
Well, I don't know.
Should be.
We're experimenting. We're experimenting at this stage.
Yeah.
We want to know what's a good mix for Yemen that'll help push the country into the future. And I must say that the mood in Yemen is very positive now. We are happy, we are excited, we are ambitious, positive, and it's something that nobody can take away from us.
As it is in Tunisia too, where the constitution is still debated. And the first draft of the constitution said that women would be complementary to men, which was an outcry in Tunisia. And now they are the fourth draft of the constitution, and women are becoming equal, still Sharia, etc., but equal. So we will see how it finishes too.
I'll see you next year.
Yeah, exactly. So I've been recently in different countries, and I've been very stricken by one thing, which was that I met many women in position of with important jobs, lawyers, doctors, professors, etc. And between their 30s and 40s, what struck me is that they were usually not married. And so they'll still live with their parents, and which means, in Egypt or in other countries, a difficult thing because the freedom to, go to nightclubs or do whatever you want to do is not obvious. And so I thought that there was this kind of sacrificed generation of women which have come higher than the men of the same age because they have traveled, because they have seen more of the dramas of life. And so they evolve quicker than the men, in my superficial view of a French living in London. But what I saw was also very young girls, 20, 22, incredibly optimistic and incredibly confident in the future. And at the foundation, we created a website called Aswat Mazriya in Egypt, which is the only independent website that we created after the revolution to give independent and neutral news to Egyptians. And it has been such a success that we have received funding for 2 more years. So it's a big thing. The team of journalists there are massively women. It's very interesting. We didn't choose women, but it just happened. And they are very optimistic. So my question to you, Mona, is it right, my vision, that you have this kind of sacrifice generation, if I can say, because they will probably not be mother and not be, everything you can have in other countries, and this young generation which seems to be much more optimistic and ready to embrace anything?
Mm-hmm. I think it's important when you look at the Arab countries, first of all, to see the diversity of experience. Yemen is quite different from Egypt, quite different from the UAE. It has a lot to do with wealth and the role of religion in these countries and the rule of law, whether a country has a penal code or not, many things. But underneath that, there are a lot of similarities. And in many countries in the Middle East and North Africa, men and women live at home until they get married. That's just a tradition up until now. It's beginning to change. I'm seeing more and more younger people, as you were pointing out, who have chosen and are able. But this is the thing, that the question of being able to leave home. And I think what's happening in Egypt, I like to compare it to a country like Spain when they finally got rid of Franco. Because when I speak at conferences in Spain and in countries where the stark differences between what was before and what we have to move towards, it's important to point out that it was women of the so-called elite who paid that price. So we've had waves, just as we have in this country, of feminism, where it kind of ebbs and flows. So our first feminist movement in Egypt was in 1923. We had a woman called Hoda Sha'rawi, who very famously removed her face veil and said this is a thing of the past. Now, whether women in this country burnt their bras or not during second wave feminism, it's kind of analogous to that. So this is in 1923 when women were chaining themselves to the fences of parliament in the UK to get the right to vote. So feminism is not an import. We didn't import it from the West into Egypt. We've had it, but it's ebbed and flowed according to all these, the law, the role of religion, dictators, military, all of this. Now this is where Spain comes in, because I like to give this example, because it's where these women, the sacrifice generation as Monique calls them, or the elite who pay the price or who push, and are too often told you're out of touch because of you're from the elite, but they needed to make this push. Now in Spain they had military fascists, so fascists with guns, and they had on the side of those fascists with guns, fascists with God, which was the Catholic Church. You had a similar situation in Ireland, but without a military junta. And we have this in Egypt, and we have it in various, you mentioned Pakistan. We have various kind of derivations of this in these different countries. We have incredibly educated women in big cities, but we have women who receive no education whatsoever. So the conflict is always whose rights are being represented, whose voices are you hearing, and who ultimately is paying the price for this. Now, as I said, I consider myself very privileged because I can make these choices. I'm 45 years old, I'm almost about to become 46. I have chosen not to have children. That is a privilege where I come from, to choose not to have children. For other women, they are married, in many countries in the region, we struggle with child marriage, where girls are married at ages of 7 and 8 and die in childbirth at 11 and 12. That is not a choice. So when you look at the countries, I always like, whenever I'm speaking publicly, especially about women's rights, it's not about elite women fighting for elite women's rights who are out of touch with the women who don't have a voice. Everybody has a voice. But my voice is heard more, and it behooves me to amplify the voices of those that you don't hear. So it's those of us who have the privilege, those of us who are educated, who might not have all the freedom that is considered freedom because they live at home, but they're able to understand what rights are, and they're able to push. And we stand on the shoulders of many who came before us. So I'm meeting many young women in Egypt now, especially in the big cities. And I see that they have their equivalents in many other cities. In many countries in the Gulf, there are more women than men on university campuses. The women are more educated in higher education than the men. But what is the legal structure that can then help them when they graduate from university? It's not very helpful or friendly to women. So it's complicated. It's not just about education. It's not just about your ability to leave home and live alone. It's many things.
Shimon Peres told once in an interview that President Obama asked him, how is it that it's so difficult to change in the Arab and the Muslim countries? And Peres said, it's the husbands. It's the husbands who have the power, the men who have the power and don't want to lose the power. So I think that it's very true, everything you say. But what you have to convince now is the men And so, you know, in all these countries, the constitution will be done mostly by men, unfortunately. And it's the ones you have to...
You have to convince the men, but the women have to fight. So
yeah,
it's
of
not
course
just
they
about the
have to
men.
fight,
Can
yeah.
I say something?
But it's not against, I mean, it's together.
Yeah.
At the end.
About this, 1/3 of the women, of the people that making the new constitution is women, and this has never happened before in the history. 1/3. So this is an amazing record, and also, like I said, like the Arab Spring or what happened in 2011 really shook things, and it's not as the usual thing. I don't want to go there, men versus women. I really don't want to do that. And it's not the same as it was in the past. Now we are in a situation where things are happening differently, gradually. It's because of my husband and because of my father that I am who I am. So we have to give credit to the men who have supported. And I know, I mean, Farah's husband Hussein, I don't know if he's around here, but he's been very supportive. And so I'm sure there are men who are very supportive, and we have to build on that. It's not versus. I don't like that. I want to say that it's a change in the culture, and considering that women is a resource, an important resource in the society that has to be supported and built on. And what we need to do, for example, in Yemen, we need to help the entire society understand that by supporting women, women's education, women's empowerment, women's political presence, that we are helping the entire society. I just wanted to point out that point.
That's very good. Farahnaz, I guess you must have a lot to say about this issue.
Well, you know, I said this yesterday in a panel, but I truly believe this. Change for women and change for minorities, religious or ethnic or anything else, it can only come, it has to come both ways, bottom up and top down. They have to both exist. It's not just about upper class women. You know, there are women, I told you, there was a woman in Pakistan who was the Muslim world's first Muslim prime minister. But in the elections just now, 2 months ago, we had a woman, a Hindu woman from one of the poorest, oppressed castes within Hinduism, an untouchable, who ran for parliament from Sindh. She didn't win, but she took on the landowners, she took on everybody. And do you know what was so fascinating is that within the press, all the young women journalists got so excited that they stopped paying attention in that election to what party she was from. It didn't become about party, it became about her bravery. We also have a woman in parliament today from FATA, from, Taliban land, in a way, okay, a place where most polling stations, women were not allowed to go and cast their votes. Yet you had this woman who ran for parliament and won. Yep. So these are the movements which are so important. And a lot of these women were inspired by the women who came before. So it's women from the bottom, women from the top, and legislation. I always come back to this.
Oh, of course.
What our example has been, and I hope we can help our Arab sisters, is that in the last parliament, we passed, with great difficulty, several bills for women. A bill to prevent sexual harassment of women in the workplace, because even if a woman is educated and she gets a job, what happens so many times is that there is so much sexual harassment that she ends up leaving, right? We passed that bill. I used to sit next to bearded men with turbans and Islamic clerics who didn't believe women should be in the parliament. And yet we got the votes because we did what any politician does. Backroom stuff, you gave something on some other bill in some other way, you got their votes for this. We passed it. We passed the acid controls bill because acid violence against women in Pakistan, now Bangladesh, all over Africa, acid is so cheap and it mars a woman forever. If you guys have not seen a movie called Saving Face, which was made by a Pakistani...
Sharmeen Obaidi.
Yes, Sharmeen Obaid Chinoy.
She received an Oscar for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So she actually shows the women in parliament at that time, we were all voting for that bill, the passage. So bills are crucial because at least if you have the laws, you have something to turn to. Yeah. Then if Thomson Reuters can get you a lawyer, the foundation, you can get a lawyer and fight your case because the law against sexual harassment or acid violence is now on the books.
Yeah. No, the rule of law and the laws are crucial and constitution. I'm very conscious of the time, and I'm sure that in the room there are plenty of people who would like to ask questions. So I think I will move now to the questions. The problem is we don't have microphones, so you have to move and speak into this microphone if you want to ask a question. So please start.
Hello, I'm Stephen Kaufman from Houston. Nadia, my question of you flows from my own ignorance, which I hope you will enlighten and eliminate. Listening to you, I hear a feminist, but looking at the way you dress, you appear to be subjugated to men's rules. Can you enlighten me how that isn't the case, please?
Sure. You don't like this? It's actually...
He prefers the red hair.
Yeah, I mean, I thought pink was in fashion. It's a choice. It's a choice, and it's an identity issue.
But I guess the question can be also: do women in Yemen wear the kind of hair that
well, there are women. I mean,
so it's a real choice.
Yeah.
So you're free to dress the way you wish to choose.
If I had wanted to dye red or pink, I don't. But I could have done it. In Yemen, it would have been much more difficult, of course, because there's the cultural surrounding that people look down. But there is no law against it, and people will not stone me in the streets and things like that. I will be harassed, yes, but it's a choice. And women, for example, who choose to cover up their faces here are also harassed. And they're looked, I mean, people find them very strange and scary. In the US, I suppose, if you saw somebody like a ninja in the street. So it's the same thing. It's what you have to pay for the choices you make in your dressing. And I think I look nice.
Another question.
I love the pink. This is a naive question, but everybody has commented on the obstacle that the Muslim Brotherhood represents. So is there any way to perceive any kind of softening in the future, any room for movement on the part of the Muslim Brotherhood to begin to incorporate some of this change for women?
Well, I think when it comes to Egypt, one of the main goals of the June 30th protests is to remind Mohammed Morsi that the Muslim Brotherhood is not the majority in Egypt. Mohammed Morsi got 13 million votes, and the campaign that called for these protests has been trying to gather 15 million, and they say that they have, and I myself have signed their petition to gather the votes. So he got just 25% of votes in the first round of elections in Egypt. So that's the base of the Muslim Brotherhood, 25%. The softening will come when the opposition in Egypt is strong enough to stand up to him and make it clear to him by allying themselves with the street, which is what they're trying to do now, and show him that he doesn't represent all of Egyptians, which he doesn't, and that he has two choices, either to truly include others, because every now and then he'll call for a national dialogue after he's already decided something, and then he'll call the opposition and say, let's discuss it, and the opposition say there's nothing left to discuss because you've already made your decision. So we have to make them more inclusive, but that's proven to be very difficult. So the way to fight them now in Egypt, we don't want constant bloodshed, we don't want constant overthrows, we want a system in Egypt that works, that guarantees us, we vote you in, if you don't produce what we voted you to do, we vote you out. That is ultimately our goal, and that's going to take a while in Egypt.
It's called democracy.
Exactly, and it's a mess. And right now in Egypt, we're going through a necessary mess. When it comes to women's rights, our struggle as women in Egypt is to continue to fight in the street on two fronts. I mentioned the political revolution that everybody went out for. The social and the sexual revolution is the one that reminds people that there's still a Mubarak in our head. We've removed Mubarak from the presidential palace, but there's still a Mubarak in our head, a Mubarak in our bedroom, and a Mubarak on the street corners that is too willing to sexually assault us and try to push us out of public space. How we remove that Mubarak in our head, the revolution of the mind, is the social sexual revolution that will convince not just the Muslim Brotherhood, but everybody in the region that women's rights are not to be taken for granted.
Yeah. Another question? Yeah. But quickly, because there are a lot of questions and we are run out of time. So you have a very short answer if you want.
I'm sorry, can you
Farahnaz.
No.
Okay, next question.
Okay. Sarah Yamani from Mecca, Saudi Arabia. Mona, you spoke about the attempted Saudi revolution that was with Manal al-Sharif, who rallied Saudi women to drive. What is the role of women in countries that were directly affected by the Arab Spring to support those women in other Arab countries?
I think the best way that countries, even that don't have revolutions, for them to support women is, I think, for the women to recognize us all as allies and to recognize that our revolutions are in different stages. So in Egypt, we are able to take the revolution onto the street. In Saudi Arabia, it might still be a bit premature, but I think that if we have feminists in Egypt in the past and others in different parts of the Arab world who have formed feminist networks across the region. I think this is incredibly helpful because then we can swap best practices, we can arrange to meet where we can support each other, and if we cannot be on the street, we can at least support each other financially if we need to, legally if we can, and keep that awareness going that your revolution might not be on the street yet, but it will be. Because I know, that 30 women in your Shura Council in Saudi Arabia now. The Shura Council is a council that is appointed, it's not voted for, but for the first time in Saudi history, women were included in a Shura Council. And I know that they're pushing to give women the vote. It's not a perfect scenario in Saudi Arabia, it's a long way from it. But I think that all of these very, very small steps are influenced by the fact that Saudi women are watching Tunisian women, and are watching Yemeni women, and watching Egyptian women. So I think it's important to recognize that the revolution is along a spectrum, and that we emotionally, morally, and legally support each other in ways that we can. I've met Manal many times. We try to help each other in whatever way we can, behind the scenes. And I think in gatherings like this, it's important to point out that we are allies and in this feminist network in the region.
Can I just add something? I think that we really have to, in a way, broaden this to the Muslim world, because this is not Arab and non-Arab. I know that Arabs are very proud of being Arabs, and we are all proud of being from where we are. But today you look at countries like Malaysia and Indonesia, which had tremendous rights. Today in Indonesia, a mixed population, mixed religion, many rights. Ahmadi Muslims, Shia Muslims, and Christians are being murdered. Same thing in Malaysia. We don't want you to wait till it's too late. There is a movement of militant Islamization that to gain power and within their beliefs, women's status is not recognized. So driving a car is really good, but do you want to live like under the Taliban in Afghanistan? Do you remember those days? The public hangings.
90% of Afghan women are illiterate.
Yes.
Thanks to the Taliban.
So the point is, I really think that we need to open our minds and learn from countries that have already gone through this. But that's my point of view. But, you know.
Okay. Next question.
Yeah, Ingrid Madson, past president of the Islamic Society of North America and chair of Islamic Studies at Huron University. I think it's great to see so many people interested in this topic, and the Aspen Institute is putting this on. The problem I have is, first of all, Pakistan's not part of the Arab world. Pakistan is not an Arab country. And part of the part of education is learning to make distinctions and not to conflate everything all together. Even the idea of the Muslim world is a category that really doesn't make sense. I mean, it's like saying the Christian world. I mean, certainly there are specific issues within Islamic law and legal interpretation, but Arab countries have their own dynamic. Arab Christians are a big part of the Arab Spring and are important, had an important role. I would have liked to have seen some of those women on this panel. So I really think that, conflating the Arab world and the Muslim world and saying, well, this all has to do everything with religion is really
I think
is
you have
problematic.
A good point.
And as well in Pakistan, I mean, unfortunately, the party that is represented here is a party that may not be using religious ideology to oppress people, but has used a feudal land-holding system and has had a great deal of corruption that's been proven in court to oppress women as well. If we read Mukhtar Mai's memoir, for example.
Mukhtar Mai was under a military dictator, General Musharraf. I just want to correct you on your facts.
I think that we need to make some distinctions.
Important.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, next question.
No, facts were incorrect.
Good morning. Thank you so much to all of you for all your brave stances and the work that you're doing. I'm Shelley Pfeifer, Washington, D.C. with the Ready for Hillary PAC. I had recent occasion, I was lucky to have recent occasion to meet Christine Lagarde, and I know, Monique, you know her, I've seen you both in Deauville. And at the very time when there were some recent issues going on in Egypt, and right after John Kerry visited the country, having signed out a $250 million check to the Egyptian government. So to your point earlier, Mona, about what can we do here? And I asked her to please remember the women when she, of course, in her very powerful position, does what the IMF, has been doing, negotiating with. In fact, she had been talking about the different things that they had been negotiating, none of which was women's rights. So I said, please don't forget the women. And anyone who's oppressed in the country, for that matter, under this. But having said that was one unique opportunity for one, and I know she took it to heart because she turned right around to a senior official from the State Department and said to him as he walked over to her, you need to tell your boss that he needs to not forget the women when he's negotiating, he's dealing with Egypt. So that's a side. But what can we do as a group here? This is just a small kernel of a group that's very, very concerned about what we see happening after the Arab Spring. On the one hand, we were all enthralled to see the changes coming. On the other hand, we see how women have been really, in so many countries, perhaps Yemen, accepted, shunted out of the political process. So what actually can we do? Do we write our I feel like there needs to be more of a movement, more of a group, so it's not one-on-one. So are there thoughts you have?
Great question.
I think it's very important to recognize what you can do here and what you can't do from here. Because the reason I keep mentioning women are fighting on the ground and women in the region need to create a network and all of this is that no one I know in the region is calling for anyone to come and rescue us. That is not a scenario that is on the table at all. We're going to rescue ourselves. We're going to liberate ourselves, and it's going to be long and difficult, but we're paying the price and we'll continue to pay the price. What we can do here is, as Americans, because I'm an Egyptian American, is to recognize what we do to hurt. I mean, when I was attacked, I went on American television and said, the US tax-paying side of me paid the money that helped the Egyptian side of me beat me and sexually assault me. This is what we need to separate. We need to, yes, write those letters, keep your representatives, on their toes and make them know that you recognize that they're turning a blind eye to what's happening to women there. Do not be fooled by these cultural relativism arguments, because we're fighting against that kind of culture. But also, and this is really important, amplify the voices of the women there who are fighting and amplify the voices of the women here. Because you cannot claim to help women over there if you ignore women over here. And as I said, this is a global struggle that is playing out in various degrees. And that's why I began with Wendy Davis. Because this is not over there and the bad men over there. There are struggles here. So when you claim to be an ally of women over there and they see you fighting for women's rights here, they'll take you more seriously, rather than as a pet project over there.
Nadia, do you have something to answer?
Well, the media has played, although I am a journalist and you are, but the media has played a negative role in portraying Arab women and Muslim women maybe generally, and it's like we have the boogeyman in our part of the world, and it's not like that. We are strong, capable women, and we need you to know that. We need you to know that it's the age of the woman, and now that Arab women and Muslim women are on a roll and they're going to start changing their own circumstances. The positive vibes that we get from you also, that when you hear about us, you do not think about, I mean, some guy asked me last year, I was in LA, and he said, so can you walk in the street without people stoning you? And I'm like, duh. Yeah. It just feels so bad if you are still thinking of camels and things like that. So please, I mean, if it's possible that you can spread the word around and say, no, there's change, and that there's internet and you can know,
Facebook,
and Facebook, and so if you can hear more about our side of the world and our struggle to be a modern democratic country, that is the best you can do.
Very good. Last question, because I think we are over.
Mona, my question comes not from me, but from a very good friend of mine a 16, 17-year-old girl who lives in Cairo. She wants to know how women can get around what she considers the inevitable marginalization of women's rights there are a lot of things that Egypt needs to do politically. A lot of things need to change, reformed. How do you feel you can get around what she feels is an inevitable marginalization of the women's rights issue?
Well, I would encourage your 16-year-old friend to contact me, because I've moved back to Cairo and I'm very involved with feminist groups on the ground, and there are many of them. And if she would like to come and volunteer with what the group that I volunteer with is called Bahaya Masr. It means, it's a term of endearment for Egypt. And this group is a feminist pressure group that organizes protests and that goes out and pushes back against things like female genital mutilation. It's pushing hard for legislation against sexual assault, to actually define terms like street sexual harassment. And just as importantly as fighting for these issues in the big cities, they also go to the countryside where they help women issue identification papers. Because lack of IDs, this came up yesterday in our panel on Girl Rising, the documentary, actually documenting girls and women is just as important as getting them into cars, is just as important as making sure that we can be there in protests and have safe public space. So I'm very happy to hear that you have a 16-year-old friend in Cairo who wants to know how to fight this. Please ask her to contact me, and I will be glad to put her in touch with feminist pressure groups on the ground who welcome teenage girls, because that's how it starts.
Thank you, Mona. And for friends in Yemen?
I want to say that there are champions and role models. So this girl can reach out to different champions in the region. And for example, the first female Nobel Peace Prize winner came from Yemen, of the Arab world, and that was Tawakkul Karman, if you haven't heard of her. And so she is a legend for us. And this year also I won a Business for Peace Prize in Oslo as well. So Yemeni women are an example of how there are champions, and in Egypt you have so many award winners and amazing ladies, and in the rest of the larger Middle East. So champions, role models, people we look up to and think that we can continue the struggle so that we reach somewhere.
Thank you very much to all of you, because you are really role models.